talk a little bit about your experiences in terms of your induction, your training, and then your eventual participation in the air campaign in the war in Europe. So, Ed, why don't you just go ahead and introduce you both, and then we'll just kind of go.
Ed or Hap?
I mean, Hap. I'm sorry. Hap. Let's go ahead and introduce you both.
Are we live now?
We're live. We're recording.
My name is F.C. Hap Chandler. I'm a native of Toccoa, Georgia. Seventh generation Georgian, I might add. On Pearl Harbor Day, I was a student at Wheaton College near Chicago, and the Navy and Marine Corps were recruiting pilots, and I missed the cut. So I went downtown to Chicago and enlisted in what was called then the Enlisted Reserve Corps. And they said, well, when you finish college, we'll call you to active duty. Well, in the fall of 1942, it became embarrassing for an adult male of my age to be on the street out of uniform. So a friend of mine, who was also in the enlisted reserve, said, I'm getting tired of people looking down their nose at us. Let's go see that sergeant and see if we can get a pin to wear that shows that we're in the Army. So we did. And the sergeant said, I'll take care of it. And he did. About a week later, I was at Fort Sheridan, Illinois, February 15th, 1943. Like being at the North Pole in those days, right off Lake Michigan. From Fort Sheridan, I went to St. Petersburg, Florida for basic training. I qualified for aviation cadet training and was sent to the University of Florida in Gainesville. Spent 3 months there. Went to San Antonio, where they ran a classification center. Basically, this was a series of tests designed to see whether you had the aptitude to fly an airplane or be a bombardier navigator. I qualified as a bombardier and was shipped to Ellington Field near Houston, Texas. In fact, that's the NASA headquarters now, as I understand, operational headquarters. About halfway through pre-flight, which was on the order of 10 weeks, if I recall correctly, they got all the cadets and bombardiers in my particular category of bombardiers in the base theater. It's an opportunity of a lifetime, fellas. If you want to go to navigation school, you can leave in 2 weeks. Everybody that volunteers, put up your arm. Guess what I did? So Christmas time of 43, I was on a troop train going from Houston to Miami. Pan American Airways had established the first aerial navigation school in the United States at the University of Miami. And that's where I went for navigation training. 50 hours, 10 5-hour missions in antique airplanes that were the grandfather of PBY. I think one trip bought them to make a very long trip in those days from Miami to Havana. At any rate, it was a quick and dirty exposure to navigation. From there I went to Colorado Springs, Colorado, and met my crew, and it went briefly like this. Congratulations, Ben, you're in 4-engine bomber. See, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4. The only trouble with those war-weary B-24s was the fact that normally 2 or 3 of the 4 engines would operate properly. And if you know the topography of Colorado Springs and Denver, if we took off to the north, we had to do a quick 180 to avoid going into the ground. So we'd go down to Pueblo. And, when I look back on it, very rudimentary training. And being very happy in Colorado Springs, the Army, in its wisdom, transferred us to Mountain Home, Idaho. We call it Homeless Mountain, and I maintain I got on a first-name basis with every rattlesnake in the state of Nevada. The rumor was that even the chaplain would over the hill with it. But it didn't last long, about 3 weeks. And in Topeka, Kansas, we got a brand new B-24. What a beautiful airplane. I'll never forget it. Almost like my first girlfriend. And we took it up and pre-flighted and checked out the engines and swung the compasses and did all the things you do with a new airplane and headed for New Hampshire, Grenier Field. From there to Goose Bay, Labrador. I tell you, this Georgia boy was seeing the world. And I well remember when I was 6 or 7 years old going on, I was visiting my grandmother. And the Atlanta Constitution had headlines that said, Lindy lands in Paris. And I took it in and I said to her, gee, look what Lindbergh did. She said, the fool made it. When I was at Goose Bay, I took a look at that route across Greenland to Iceland and then down to England. I said, well, he's not the only fool next man. But the weather was good, thank goodness. It was July of 1944. I had been in the Air Force about, maybe 18 months, a little longer. At any rate, July 28, 1944 was my birthday. I was 23 years old, and I spent it flying from Goose Bay across Greenland to Keflavik, Iceland. And my pilot, who was somewhat of a bon vivant, ran into an old flying school buddy, and they were in the officers club tossing down skies waiting for the sun to go down. Well, the sun doesn't go down in July and Iceland. So we had a pretty hungover pilot. We made it to Valley Wales, and bless our pointed heads, we landed a gorgeous airplane with all our new equipment, and here came 3 jeep loads of MPs, and they said, fall out, and they asked a few questions, one of which is, do you have any intoxicating liquids on board? Well, the pilot had a case of something or other. 3 fellas, who knows, VO or something. Oh no, we don't have any whiskey. At which point, said, search the airplane. We were lucky to get away with our underwear. They took the airplane and took all our new equipment. I kept my B4 bag, and my introduction to England was a lunch called cold Brussels sprouts. That was July 1944, and this Jackrabbit Major that was in charge of his MP outfit was a P-51 pilot, and he said, you guys got here too late. I was over Warsaw yesterday, and war will be over in 2 weeks. A couple of months later, I hoped he was right. So I flew 35 missions from September 44 to March of 45. And I hesitate to even mention this, Ed, because Ed was there when times were very tough from a casualty point of view. But I almost had a fist fight with a guy who was in statistical services in the Pentagon some years ago. And we were talking in this vein about 8th Air Force, how many missions have been here. You know, I told him my history and when I'd flown the mission. He said, oh, you were there in the easy days. Ed was there, it was really tough. And I think at this point it'd be a good idea for me to defer to my senior, who flew on one of the most deadly missions of World War II. And it was on 14th November 1943.
October 14th.
October. You were there.
So are you deferring to me? You want to start to talk now?
Yeah, just let us know a little bit about your entry into the service.
I was hoping you'd tell me what Ron B. Ron.
Martini, it was
I just thought it sounded funny.
I'm a native of New York State, and I think the first question is, where were you on Pearl Harbor Day? And I was home with my mommy, listening to the Washington Redskins and the New York Giants pro football game on radio, of course we didn't have TV. And they broke in and made the announcement that Pearl Harbor had been bombed, and like most people, I had no earthly idea where Pearl Harbor was. I was drafted into the Air Force. I had an automobile, I had a girlfriend, and I was having a good time at age 20. And I'd like to report that I was real patriotic, but I was having too good a time to think about leaving. But at any rate, I did go into the service in July of '42 and did my basic training in Atlantic City. And they decided I had the aptitude to be a radio operator, so they sent me to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I went through radio school there, which was about a 6-month period, and then on to gunnery school in Fort Myers, Florida. After I completed gunnery school, which was in January of '43, I was sent to Salt Lake City, where our crew was assembled.
Was that the Wendover Air Base?
No, it was right in Salt Lake
It's
City.
in Salt Lake City.
Yeah. And we did all our so-called phase training on the West Coast in the 2nd Air Force. And finished up, we were in Walla Walla, Washington. And they sent us by train to Kearney, Nebraska, where we picked up a brand new B-17. One little interesting thing, at the last moment, this old fellow, probably 35 years old, came out and said, "I'm flying to England with you guys." And so I didn't know who he was. He was a major. And he took a piece of chalk, and on the new B-17 he wrote OLEMISS Roman numeral 2. Well, he turned out to be Fred Key. Now, if you're an aviation historian, the Key boys, Fred and Al, set all kinds of endurance records in the 30s out of Meridian, Mississippi. Key Field was named after them. And so he had named the new B-17 after their ship that they would take up weeks at a time, which was OLS Roman numeral 1. We flew from Kearney, Nebraska to Gannon, Newfoundland, hung up for about 10 days for weather, and then a straight shot to Prestwick, Scotland. And of course they were really just burying the B-17. We took it away, and we were sent to school in London to further our education. I think, well, for me to say our education needed a lot of furthering. I was only in the Air Force about 13 months. While we were in school in London, there were some plus factors. We got to know about the nightlife in London, and particularly the combat techniques of the Piccadilly Commandos. Go no further on the Piccadilly Commandos. But at any rate, while I was in school, on September 17th of '43, the 8th Air Force conducted, which was for that time a major operation. We had not been built up to air divisions. Combat wings were the biggest formations. So the 1st Combat Wing was sent to bomb the ball bearing works in Schweinfurt, Germany. The 4th Combat Wing under Curtis LeMay was sent to bomb the fighter factories in Ravensburg. And that was a very deep penetration. Instead of reversing themselves and coming back to England, they went on to Africa. Both wings got clobbered fairly well by the Luftwaffe, and particularly the 381st Bomb Group. They lost 11 ships out of 18 that day. So the next day, our crew and others were sent to the 381st as replacement crews. And I flew my first combat mission August 27th of '43, and thereafter flew most of the missions conducted by the 8th Air Force, including the infamous September 6th mission to Stuttgart, which became known as the Great Gas Shortage Mission. I remember our ground crew chief said, "I'm not too sure you guys can get there and back." we went anyway, and it proved to be pretty much true. By the time we left the target in Stuttgart, we started to sweat fuel and lighten the aircraft. By the time we hit the French coast, we were flying on smoke, and it looked like we were going to ditch. And we just about made it across an emergency English field, landed on a steel mat. Lost 45 B-17s that day. That was 450 men, of which 12 went down in the English Channel, and some of them were rescued by ASC Rescue. Now, I don't know if you want me to go on with my tour. The first 2 weeks of October were very busy ones for the 8th Air Force and OPCO, recalling the missions. On the 3rd of October, we went to Emden. And then on the 5th of October, we went to Frankfurt. This was the first time we encountered air-to-air rocket fire. The Luftwaffe had put missiles on the twin-engine fighter bombers. And,
Was that
of course,
the ME-262?
well, it would be the ME-110 probably at that time, maybe Ju-88s too. But it caused quite a bit of consternation. I remember a tail gunner on the intercom saying, "They're firing torpedoes at us." The 8th of October, which was a Friday, we went to Bremen. And that was a tough mission. Tremendous flak, very formidable fighter attacks. And our group lost 8 ships that day. We did get our first presidential unit citation. Following day was Anklam, which was way up near the Baltic Sea in what I guess basically East Prussia. Another tough one, and we lost 4 more ships. And on the 10th, 3 days in a row, Sunday the 10th, it was Munster. And we had now had air divisions, and we were in the 1st Air Division, and that looked relatively light. The 3rd Air Division, and particularly the 100th Bomb Group, got clogged.
It was 10 out of 11 ships lost by the 100th that day. Is that
I
correct?
guess so. I have a good friend who flew with the 100th and got shot down that day, Frank Murphy. You got to know Frank.
Yeah.
And he's written a book which I recommend to everybody, Luck of the Draw. And of course I tease Frank, I say, what you didn't know, that morning, we called the Luftwaffe and said, look, they're always picking on us in the 1st Air Division. Why don't you pick on the 3rd Air Division today for a change? And they said, oh, yeah, we always try to be cooperative. So that's what happened to you, Frank.
Thanks a lot.
Not true. Well, we didn't fly again then. I should say at this time, I had 13 missions, and Munster was my 13th, and they had all become mission counters. The 8th Air Force, in its wisdom, had decided if a combat crewman could survive 25 missions, he was eligible to be rotated back to the States. So we were well aware of the number of missions that we were credited for. We didn't fly again until the following Thursday and attended the briefing. And they said, going back to the ball bearing works in Schweinfurt, I think it's safe to say it wasn't greeted with a great deal of enthusiasm in the 381st, recognizing we had lost 11 ships in the first Schweinfurt mission. I think everybody took extra steps that day, I'll speak from a personal standpoint. The ground crew had provided me with a piece of armor plating, which I had on the floor of the B-17 right under the radio room hatch, which was open most times in combat. Also had a piece of radio equipment called a frequency meter, which was very substantial. And I was always vertically challenged, 5'7" probably at best. But I could stand on the frequency meter on top of the armor plating and literally poke my head out the top hatch in the radio room. Because if I saw anything that looked like trouble, I'd scooch back down like a turtle going back into a shell. Now the mission was scheduled for about mid-morning, and it was real iffy. The weather, as usual, was of concern, and we hung around, and finally they said the mission was on, and we had mixed feelings. They had called off the mission. We were rolling back to our quarters and sacked out, but recognized that if we did make the mission that day, it would probably be the next day. So at any rate, other things that were taken into account, we normally carried about 8,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition allocated to the various gun positions. This day we carried 12,000 rounds. It's interesting to note that of the 12,000 rounds, they assigned 250 rounds to me on the gun in the radio room. I think the rationale was the less ammunition for North, the less damage you could do to the 8th Air Force proper. And really it was a morale gun to a great degree. If everybody else was firing, I'd fire too. So we took off and seemed to have an awful difficult time assembling, running late, and I guess I should switch to the 305th Bomb Group because they played a big part of our day. We were supposed to fly as the low group in the 1st Combat Wing, and the 305th was the low group in the 40th Combat Wing, and they were all messed up, running late. Finally, they saw 2 groups, and they said, "Oh, the low group is open. That's where we should be," and they joined up. It wasn't the 40th Combat Wing, no, they joined up by mistake in the 1st Combat Wing. So when we came doppling along, they had preempted our position. Well, we were being led by a fellow named George Shackley, who's still alive, living in Savannah. And Shackley made one of the great decisions of his life. He decided to fly as double high in the 1st Combat Wing. So what we had was 5 groups in the 1st Combat Wing and only 2 groups in the 40th. And they were supposed to lead the mission. A fellow named Bud Two Cushion Beasley. He was smaller than me. They said he had to sit on 2 cushions to see out the aircraft. He was the mission commander, and there was a lot of confusion. He turned it over to Colonel Milton, who was leading the 91st Bomb Group. Of course, I didn't know what was going on. We were told we would have P-47 fighter escort from the Dutch coast where we entered Europe to the German border, and then we'd be on our own. So from the Dutch coast to the German border, really, I didn't see any German fighters, didn't see any P-47s also. And when we got to the German border, then it was shoot at it, okay, corral. I mean, from there on into the target, it was just endless fighter attacks by the German fighters. Truthfully, don't even remember how severe the fight was over the target. We dropped our bombs, and as we came off the target, our tail gunner said we had a German fighter in our tail. And within seconds, he had hit our #1 engine and caused considerable damage. Decision was made to shut it down, and we couldn't shut it down. That's when I began to realize I was in trouble because we had tremendous vibration. First I thought the engine was going to rip off the wing, and then I thought the whole wing was going to come off. And again, the tail gunner said a couple of fighters are queuing up again to finish us off. So our pilot, we had cloud cover probably in the neighborhood of 10,000 feet. From my position, when you're in combat, you can only see a limited area of what was going on. You don't have the whole panorama. I did see 2 twin-engine German fighter bombers. I believe they were Me-110s. They had already made a pass at us and apparently didn't do any further damage. But we did a wing over, and got down to the cloud cover.
So you left the formation at that point?
We left the formation at that point. And from there on in, we were on our own alone, and it looked like we may have to abandon the ship because of the trouble with the number one engine and the vibration. And our pilot has written a very comprehensive write-up, which I have. You could have a copy if you want. But he talked to our co-pilot, a fellow named Tex Stevens. And I'd like to say one word about Tex, if I may. After flying 25 tough combat missions against the Luftwaffe, Tex got killed in the Berlin airlift helping the German people, so it's kind of ironic, you know. But what happened before we had made the final decision, which was really the pilot's decision to either bail out or whatever, the prop tore off the prop shaft completely and stopped the horrendous vibration. So then a decision had to be made. Did we head for Switzerland, or did we try to get back to England all by ourselves? Now, I learned long after the fact that at the briefing, our pilot, a fellow named Dave Hutchins, who was recently on television, quite briefly, he had been given detailed maps of Switzerland, also the phone number of the American ambassador in Switzerland, but he had also been warned in the German part of Switzerland, you know, Germany is part German and part Italian, etc. There were rumors that the Swiss were selling downed airmen to the Germans. So, of course, I make a little scenario that I say, well, we did go down in Switzerland. The Swiss would have said, well, we have a nice young radio operator we'll sell to you for $1.98. His name is Knauth. His grandparents are from Remagen. They say, oh, we know that sorry bunch, you keep them, we don't want them, you know. But that's just a story. And we headed back for England, and significant part of our return is we were now off oxygen, probably a little less than 10,000 feet, maybe 8,000 feet. And the ball turret gunner, he got lonesome down the ball turret, so he came up in the radio room and we lit up cigarettes. All of a sudden we were in the middle of a tremendous black barrage. And what we had done was flew right over Paris, because this was still enemy territory, and they opened up on us. Well, we got out of there, fortunately, on our 3 engines and got to the French coast. And really, I feel we were a little disoriented. We were kind of flying down the channel, and probably would have ended up in the Atlantic Ocean instead of flying northwest to England. All of a sudden, 2 fighter aircraft came out of nowhere, and they were right there. I, for one, was ready to surrender to the Bulgarian Air Force or whatever came along. But they were 2 English patrol planes, and they steered us into English field where we landed. And I recall as we taxied down the runway to the hangar buildings, we were followed by a Jeep with an English officer in it. They had a gun mounted on the Jeep and 2 enlisted men. And I remember when we finally pulled up, shut down the engines, they opened the front hatch, and we had, as I say, 8,000 rounds of ammunition, and we shot it all. And the spent shells just poured out onto the tarmac. And the English are always masters of the understatement. And the English officers said, my goodness, you chaps must have been in a terrible fight. And we stayed at the English base that night, had tea for breakfast in the morning, and then they got us back to our base. That was the last we saw of our beloved F-model B-17, which we had christened This Is It. My sole claim to fame was I painted This Is It on the nose of the B-17. And And the reason for that is I was the only one on the crew that could spell "this is it." They gave us a new G model B-17 with the chin turret, and again, we flew most of the missions conducted by the 8th Air Force. Looking at my mission record, the end of November, the beginning of December, I went to Bremen 3 times. I wanted a commuter discount, but they didn't give those apparently. So I'd like to, fast forward to January 11th. I had 22 missions, and gung ho to make my 25 and go home. And I was not feeling well. I lost my appetite. I was very tired. But nevertheless, I went to the briefing, and they said they were going to send 600 B-17s to the Brunswick area of central Germany. We in the first combat wing were to bomb the fighter factories at Aschersleben. Mission was messed up right from the start, mainly by the weather. After a couple of hours in the air, a recall was sent out, and they recalled about 75% of the B-17 bombers. The rare exceptions, the fighter escort were not able to get off the ground because of weather. The second decision was made to send us, since we had penetrated so deeply, to go and complete the mission. And what we found is we had about 160 B-17s in the middle of Germany. The weather had cleared, no fighter escort. And I recall seeing at a distance about 20 single-engine fighters heading west towards England. I said, well, there goes our fighter escort. No. They were Focke-Wulf 190s, and they circled around, and they came right through our formation. That was probably the day I saw the most intensive fighter attacks, equal to Black Thursday in October. And I can recall the bombardier and the navigator and the nose saying, here they come again. And I knew within seconds they'd be going right over the open hatch in the radio room. And I'd scooch down and say a prayer. And B-17s were going down all ranks. And for whatever reason, we didn't get shot down. So we got back to England, and we had lost 8 ships again out of our group. And we got our second presidential unit citation. A little bit proud to say the group got 2 citations during their combat time over there, and I flew both the missions. So, as I said, I wasn't feeling good. We didn't fly for about 10 days. And in good medical language, I was feeling worse and worse. And finally, when they called the mission, which would have been my 24th, I told the flight surgeon, I don't think I can make it. So he said, don't make it. He said, come back at 10 o'clock and I'll take a look at you. So I reported at 10 o'clock, and he said, how long you had liver trouble? I said, I never had liver trouble. He said, well, you do now. And he said, you got a severe case of hepatitis. So it's a hospital in Cambridge for you. So off I went to the hospital in Cambridge. And the hospital wasn't all bad. They served us roast beef, steak, fresh eggs. The only trouble when you have hepatitis, the mere sight of food nauseates. The other thing I remember about that, and incidentally, I thought I was the only guy in all of England that had hepatitis. I got there, it looked like a Japanese prison ward, and it was part English, and it was part American. And some of the English were real characters out of Burma and places like that, you know. And we had an old sergeant who had been at Dunkirk, and he not only hated the Germans, he hated the Americans, and he hated everybody. But the other thing I can remember about the hospital, the brass decided you can't have all these GIs just sitting around doing nothing. You know, idle hands are the devil's workers. So they decided we needed therapy. And the therapy was basket weaving. And of course, that was our invitation to say, "Nursey, if you'd like to sit on the bed, we'll leave a couple of baskets." But the nurses were too smart for that thing. So about the middle of, I was in just about probably a month, maybe a little bit longer, about the middle of February, they paroled me out of the hospital and was back to the 381st. And I had 2 missions to fly.
Had
And
your
they-
crew rotated home at this point?
Yeah, they had rotated home, and I became a lead radio operator. And my 24th mission was to Frankfurt, and my 25th was March 8th of 44, which was the second daylight mission to Berlin. And it was not a really difficult mission. We had good fighter escort with P-51s. I was very busy on the communications. We had fighter control points so we could coordinate with the P-51s. We made the mission, dropped down bombs, except they didn't leave the bomb bed. So we had 40 incendiaries hung up in the bomb bay over Berlin at 22,000 feet. And I can recall, I could look right into the bomb bay from the radio room, and 2 bombs were laying on the catwalk, and I kicked those 2 out with my feet. But I looked at that catwalk and looked about the width of a 2x4, and fortunately the engineer came from the forward side of the bomb bay, and he got out at the bomb racks. And we wore what we called an English type chute. We wore the harness, but the parachute pack in itself was separate, and if we thought we needed it, we hooked it on to the harness and became a chest chute. Well, this guy was out there with his harness on, but he didn't have the pack on. And I can recall saying to myself, "This sucker falls out of the bomb bay without his pack on. I think I'll just faint." But he finally released the hung-up bombs, and we got back to our base in England. And thereafter, that was my 25th, and I had a relatively short interview which I said, "Now, if you want to stay over here north, we have great plans for you." And I knew they lied. So I said, "I'll take option 2. I wanted to go home and see my mommy and my fiancée. I hadn't seen them in almost 2 years. So they had another short ceremony where I was given my Distinguished Flying Cross, and they arranged for transportation. I went home on the Queen Mary the beginning of April of 44, when everybody was coming from the States to England for the D-Day invasion. I was going the other way. So that kind of sums up my time with the 8th. And there they sent me around to several locations, Troop Carrier Command, where they had C-47s with a hook under it, towing training gliders. And I said, "Oh, I'd rather go back and do another tour in the bomber." But for whatever reason, I was alone. They were probably about 20 of us lost souls. And they sent us all to McGill in Tampa, and I got assigned to Hunter Field in Savannah, where we spent over a year there. What they were doing, there was still a place of embarkation. Ships were going from the factory to modification centers and then to Hunter Field, and we would take them up and see if the modifications had been made. When Germany surrendered, they packed us all up and sent us to Chico, California, to do the same thing. By the time we ever got organized, Japan had surrendered. So I was cut out to be a civilian, so as soon as my points allowed me, which was probably around November of 45, I got out. And the only other brilliant thing I did after being out from November of 45, a friend of mine, a so-called friend, said, "You ought to get in the reserve outfit. We weren't making much money." I was in the underwriting department of the Metropolitan Knife and the Group Department in New York. "We ought to get in the reserve outfit." "Yeah, that's a good idea." So looking at my papers, I joined up in the reserve outfit in December of 49, and Korea broke out in the summer of 50. And they scared the life out of me. I had 2 little girls, and had to fill out questionnaires, and even worse, take a physical, but they never told me that. So once my 4 years was up in the reserves, my friend said, "Why don't we join the Girl Scouts?" I said, "No." No joining. So that's my story to the best of my ability. And, as I say, I brought along my corroborating, knowing I was going to be with lawyers. I said, I know I will be in deep trouble here. Remember the key found hearings that they had years ago. I guess you guys are too young to remember that, but the gangster, I think was his name, they said, "What have you ever done for your country?" I said, "I pay my taxes." Do you remember it?
I can't remember who that was.
Frank Costello. Frank Costello. I pay my taxes. So I pay my taxes. So, unless you have some questions of me.
What I'd like to do is just maybe just have Hap tell us about his experience flying out. You flew B-24s? Is that right?
Yeah, I flew B-24.
And
if Ed were up to speed, he'd say that's the box the B-17 came in. And of course, we refer to the B-17 as a 4-engine Piper Cub. So.
You consider them our best fighter escort. The Germans would pick on them. So I'm going to sit back and let you take over.
Yeah.
I spoke enough.
No, that was great. What I'd like to do is have you kind of do a similar thing. Just take us through your experience.
I'll be glad to.
in Europe.
I simply want to point out that Ed was awarded a well-deserved Distinguished Flying Cross. And there's the decoration. And that was a great day for you.
Yeah, more so than the Distinguished Flying Cross was the fact that I was going to go home.
So make sure we get a good shot of the cross.
Yeah, it's in there.
I didn't bring mine. I don't even have it in the case.
The other medal they gave to the air crews, in Ed's case, you had to fly 5 missions to get one of these. That's an air medal.
Did you get one for every 5 missions, or just for your first 5 missions?
Every 5 missions.
First 5, after you completed 5, you got the air medal. Then when you completed your 10, you got a cluster to the air medal. 15th a cluster, and the 20th the 3rd cluster, which is what I got. And if you had survived the 25, you got the DFC.
Okay.
Okay,
Well, to pick up, I had arrived in England and was lucky to get away with my underwear from this larcenous major and his MP detachment. And we were sent to what was called a Rappel depot in Chorley, England. This replacement depot. We stayed there for a day or 2 and flew over to Ireland in a B-17 of all things. And, they had what they called a combat training organization. As I recall, it was about 30 miles west of Belfast on the western shore of Lough Neagh. It was very isolated, out in the flax fields, and my first exposure to the UK was not a particularly salubrious one, in as much as it was flax season, and the fertilizer they used on those flax fields was rather pungent. As a matter of fact, I was running the same situation when the spring thaw set in Korea. At any rate, we survived and got to 489th Bomb Group, 852nd Squadron, Halesworth, England. And the first thing that happened to us, they took all the guns out and stripped the airplanes of as much equipment as possible. We went to Southampton to the field there. At which point they loaded these airplanes with sacks of flour. It seems that Paris had been liberated, and they were hungry for bread, so they made a flour run to Orléans, which had just been captured by the Third Army. And I well recall when we lined up at the runway, there were bomb craters all down the runway, so instead of making a straight in, we kind of taxied around the bomb craters. And so we were in France. And again, we decided that we would do a little sightseeing, so up to the Lough River we went. I remember the chateaus. I'd like to go back and visit it sometime. But there's Paris in all its glory in August 1944, just liberated. And we're, I don't know, 500 feet, I think. They would probably put us under the jail if we did that. And we went down the Seine River, and around Paris, and saw the Eiffel Tower and all this with us for about a half hour. It really was very exciting for a country boy. And then we headed low level across France for England, and I think every time I look around, there was either a chicken coop exploding, or a cow taking off, or some poor farmer behind the plow and his horses. At any rate, that was quite a trip. We made 2 more of these sort of trips.
Hap, just 1 second. We just ran our tape here, so I just want to stop and put the tape. We're good. Go ahead.
Am I on?
Yep, you're on.
Yeah. We made 2 more of these flights. However, the second and third cargoes were artillery maps. And the Third Army had their 6x trucks there, ready, willing, and able, and they unloaded us in record time. The story we got from these tankers was that Patton had moved so fast he'd run off his maps and they needed them. Well, I was in no position to question that. At any rate, we carried bomber loads of maps. This continued for another 2 months. We went back to combat status, another group took over. And at this point, they started to fly gasoline in those B-24s. Some of it in 5-gallon jerry cans, and later they rigged them up with what we call bladder tanks in the bomb bay. These were rubber things you could hang in the bomb bay and carry the gas. At any rate, the intent was to keep the Third Army moving. But for whatever reason, I was ready to get into combat. And I well remember my first mission. It was to Magdeburg, which is probably 50, 60 miles southwest of Berlin on the Elbe River. And I could still see that damn island in the river, and there was a tank factory on there. That's what we bombed. But the thing I remember most, there were 3 flak belts as you approached Magdeburg. So they started shooting at us with those 88mm flak guns about an hour before the target. And this got right uncomfortable. And of course, the green as grass, the first exposure to combat. I look out the window, and then I wished I hadn't, because there was a B-24 exploding, and here was a half a dozen parachutes, and the flak is coming up. And the 88mm, if you could see the black circles and what appeared something like a pawnbroker's sign, you remember the 3 bones? It wasn't very near, but when you started seeing red centers, you know, there's some red hot shrapnel in there. And holes started coming in the airplane, and I'm ducking into my helmet, trying to get smaller by the minute. At any rate, we made it, and the next mission was probably the most memorable I ever flew. Field Marshal Viscount Montgomery had decided that he was going to turn the corner of the Rhine and make a dash for Berlin. This is September 1944. The operation in the market garden. There's a book written about it called A Bridge Too Far. There's a movie made about it. Well, the 82nd Airborne and the 101st Airborne go in and bail out. And then the glider train had to go in. Ed, you were fortunate to get out of that glider business. What they did, they took about 250 B-24s from the 2nd Air Division, and they loaded us up. In the case of my airplane, we had rifles wrapped in blankets And in some airplanes, believe it or not, we had mortar shells, and the idea was to resupply the airborne. So we took off from East Anglia at minimum altitude, which, if I recall correctly, is about 300 to 500 feet. We got 250 B-24s on the trail. We head across the North Sea, and guess what? Here's the whole glider train, and we just about to run over. C-47 pulling a glider might go 140 miles an hour. B-17 indicated 160. So, the greatest combat maneuver I was ever involved in was a big 360-degree circle of 250 B-24 in the middle of the North Sea. And why we didn't pile into the sea there, we had a little more than 300 feet. At any rate, we made it. And
You're at the Reno Air Races.
yeah, not this summer, really. So by this time, the glider train had moved on ahead sufficiently for us to inform up. And we flew over Walcheren Island, which is occupied by the Germans. And the navigator on B-24 was in the nose. We had a window. We could see a little bit of what's going on. So I look out the window, and the streets are full of blonde, blue-eyed Dutch girls, and they were all waving flags, and take off my helmet and wave it back. And then I look in the storefronts and on the rooftops, and the Germans have these people in the middle of the street with guns on them to do all this cheering to distract us, I guess. In the meantime, they're shooting at us with everything they've got. And the machine guns on top of these roofs of these buildings, on haystacks, and all. Once I saw a haystack, it was camouflaged over an 88mm flak gun. That's as close as I ever got to one of those things. And you know, if it had made a direct hit, it was bang, that was it. At any rate, it gave me great respect for the ground troops. We flew to Nijmegen. Excuse me. I was with the 489th group at this point. We went to Eindhoven, which was the southernmost major Dutch city of Operation Market Garden. You recall that there were 6 bridges, if I remember right, 5 or 6 bridges, and they got every one of them, including a tremendous railroad bridge at Nijmegen, which would have enabled the Armor Division to sweep right into Arnhem. But the British first airborne, for whatever reason, and it was a very valiant effort. It didn't quite succeed, didn't get the final bridge. At any rate, we were pretty far south. It flew right over all these gliders. Some of them were nose up, some of them had crashed on a wing. C-47s crashed all over the place. And all at once, one of these gliders, the nose came up, and out came a Jeep with a 50 caliber and 2 or 3 guys. And I looked over the tree line, which happened to be the German-Dutch border, and there sit the Germans with their machine guns and their tanks. And, you know, it was a fleeting glimpse, admittedly, when they were going at the rate we were. But, again, I was pretty glad I didn't join the infantry like my dad. That was thrills, chills, and spills. We had another low-level B-24 mission in August of 1943 for the oil field. It's a mission of legend, 5 Congressional Medal of Honor.
Was that the first mission to Pulaski?
The first mission to Pulaski was flown August 1st, 43. However, there was a previous mission to Pulaski, and a friend of mine was on, as a matter of fact, Bill Joyner. Hap Arnold had a friend named Harry Allison. He was a colonel. And Doolittle was a reserve officer, and he got the plum assignment to get on the carrier with his B-25 and go bomb Tokyo. And Allison said, Hap, so I've heard, Hap, we can't let Jimmy Doolittle outdo us. He says, go get the best crews and about a dozen B-24s and take off to China and beat him in Tokyo. I didn't know General Arnold, but I understand he was a very impulsive kind of guy. If he decided he wanted something done, he would just take whoever was available and say, get yourself to China and straighten out that maintenance situation. Or go over to England, you know, and here's a poor guy, he's maybe a lieutenant or a sergeant. He's never seen a four-star general before, and the guy telling him, get on your horse and do this or that, and you have no idea what's going on. But Howison was a pretty feisty character, and he got all the way to Khartoum, which is in the Sudan. And this was about the time the battle in the desert was getting very desperate for the British. So Tedder, who was an air marshal, and later Ike's deputy, commandeered these B-24s. I wish somebody had made a recording of Allison's comments to the distinguished Air Vice Marshal. The upshot of it was that Allison was sent on the fastest flight back to the States. And these 12 airplanes wound up in Tel Aviv, I think. And one day they decided to go bomb Ploesti, and this was 6 or 8 months before the all disbursement. It wasn't very effective, but 3 of them went to Turkey. And I asked Bill Joyner about it. He said, well, he said, you know, we didn't hit the thing and they didn't hit us, so that was the way it was in those days, because we were learning our business. I'm sorry to divert, but low level with a B-24 is no fun. From there, I flew in September and October, and we went back to Magdeburg a time or two, mostly to the Ruhr Valley. I flew 3 missions to Cologne, and I recall Cologne had, I'm not sure of the size of these anti-aircraft, but they were old-sized. The 88 millimeter was the standard flak gun, but these things were about 155 millimeters. And they used smokeless powder, so when they would explode, it would look like a cumulus cloud. And they had some of these in Cologne, I remember those particularly. And one day we came back, I don't know, we couldn't count the holes in the airplane after a while. The bombardier took one look and faded. But thank God nobody was wounded. And flak was very intense during my tour. The Luftwaffe was still around, and it was like a rattlesnake. If you got in the wrong position, it would hit you. And I subsequently was transferred to the 491st Bomb Group, which was an exceptional group. And on 26 November 1944, they went to Prestwick, which is an oil refinery near Hanover. And out of the 32 airplanes taking the attack, 16 of them were shot down in a matter of 5 minutes. And it was all a circumstance where somebody made a mistake and they dropped the bombs prematurely in a cornfield someplace. And the command pilot, in those days, when you saw the smoke go out of the bomb bays of the lead ship, then everybody salvo. So here you go, 32 airplanes, they salvo their bombs, plow the fields short of the target, so they look up at Prestwick. Now, these oil targets were really tough. They had a lot of flak guns up there. And the command pilot says, what we'll do is we'll turn short of the target and go down to the rally point. The idea was you go to the initial point, make the bomb run, drop the bombs, and you dive usually about 1,500 feet to a rally point, which might be 15, 20 miles. We'll cut over the rally point and join up with the group. Well, as soon as they got out of the bomber stream, Luftwaffe picked up on them. And in the next 5 minutes, they lost 16 out of 32, and about half of them crash landed in Belgium. The rest of them got back to the base. Those that came back, half of them were decimated. I'll point this out just to show you that the Luftwaffe was a very effective defensive organization, and the German organization on the ground with radars and fighter control was super, is that the right word? I guess super. It was excellent. The problem was, after Ed flew his tour, we had what we called a big week, which deliberately went out to destroy the aircraft manufacturing capacity of Germany, and pretty effectively did so. And then in March and April of '44, leading up to the invasion, the 8th Air Force by this time had the P-51 escort fighters, and they would go deep into Germany, go as far as Munich. And the first missions to Berlin. I spoke with Gallen, who was the commander of fighters for the Luftwaffe, and I asked him what happened. He said, these great air battles, he lost his squadron commander, his group commanders, and his experienced pilots, so his replacements were German kids who had very sketchy training, and the P-51s, I'm not sure how many they had, I think 800 or 900, they effectively blew them out of the sky. That's why on D-Day, the Luftwaffe didn't show. Thank God. If we'd had the Luftwaffe out in force on D-Day, it could have been a different story. That's not my story. I was not there. I read about it. I joined the lead crew, and they changed my crew position to the nose turret for the B-24. And I had a piloted map. The name of the game was, you find out where we are on the map. And in the, on the flight deck, we had a dead reckoning navigator. In the waist, we had a radar navigator. And in the winter of 44 and 45, it took at least 3 of us to try to keep up with the position of the airplane. Since we were leads, it was critical that we fly the routed brief, particularly as regards the anti-aircraft positions along the route. And we deliberately tried to avoid them, and of course we couldn't at the target. Well, I kind of liked it up there in the nose turret. I had a gun I could shoot back. And the other thing was I could see what was going on. And what I saw, mostly I liked, but there were a few occasions when I didn't much care for what I saw. I'll mention my last mission in Magdeburg, the ME-262 route force. The Germans were flying red flag, pink flag, blue flag. There was all kind of signals. It was a coordinated attack on the part of the anti-aircraft and the fighters. It was the only time I ever saw P-51s come into the flak, come into the heavy flak with the bombers. And these ME-262s, they were diving through the formation, and the 51s were after them. Yeah, the airplanes were blowing up, and guys were bailing out. And this was March the 3rd of 1945. Luftwaffe was pretty good that day. I was very fortunate. I never got a scratch. I flew 35 missions. I got 5 or 6 air medals. And one of the real disappointments of flying that number of missions, I think I had over 300 combat hours, was the fact that some staff officer in his wisdom had decided that there was no distinguished flying involved and just flying 35 missions. So I missed my distinguished flying calls. I suffered because I was to be awarded one in Korea. When I look back on it, Korea was a piece of cake compared to the 8th Air Force and WW2. The 8th Air Force was never turned back. The 8th Air Force lost 26,000 plus men in total. They had the highest casualty rate of any organization in the armed forces, with the exception of the submarines. There were 350,000 men at one time or another signed the 8th Air Force. They wrote the book on daylight precision bombing. They produced the leaders of the post-war Air Force. trained most of the crews, the lead crews at any rate, for the B-29 offensive against Japan. It's always in the staff colleges questionable as to whether daylight precision bombing can win the war without ground forces. And I wouldn't try to debate that. All I would say is that when the B-29 got through with Japan and some of those horrible firebombing raids, I was in Tokyo in 1953, and you could still look for miles and see total desolation. I'd been burned out. 15 years later, I went back and you couldn't tell we were there. Just amazing the renaissance of that country, as Korea and others. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is, if we didn't win the war, the Enola Gay and Paul Tibbets and his crew and the A-bomb damn well stopped it. It was a great experience. I wouldn't care to live through it again. But what my grandson marvels at is the fact that here we took guys who were 18 and 19 years old. When I got to England, they called me grandpa. I was 23. Father was 20 and everybody else was 18 and 19 years old. They were a high school class of 43. The resilience and the capability and ability and initiative of the average American to flourish and prevail in such circumstances is remarkable. It's part of our national heritage. My friend Frank Barkley, whom you mentioned, Ed, was invited back to England last summer. And the 100th Bomb Group, what remains of it, is still there at Mildenhall in East Anglia, where I was staying. He came back and shaking his head. He said, Ed, that's the greatest bunch of kids you ever saw. He said, the training is just fantastic. And he said, you know, the other thing, they would rather go at night than in daylight. And when we went in daylight, we always made fun of our sort of RAF buddies on at night. But the equipment they have nowadays, you can see just as well at night as you can during the day. If you'll indulge me, I'll tell you a little story about a fellow I met at a group reunion down in Savannah. You remember that there was a stealth fighter shot down in Bosnia?
Yes.
Somebody down in the light of the moon, and they got him. And the anti-aircraft that the enemy had now, particularly that Russian-made stuff, was extremely accurate. It was bad enough in Korea, and that's 50 years ago. Anyhow, this pilot gets shot down. They spot him immediately. They get a helicopter in the air, and they go in and they get him. Well, the fellow I met was the commander of the group of the organization that had the helicopters. I said, how'd you do it? He said, well, I got in the helicopter. I got the biggest guy I had, and another fellow that knew the man that was down. He said, we spotted him. They have a little device, a beacon type thing. So we spotted him, and the bad guys all around. So I had my 50 caliber guys kind of keeping the thing. They hit the ground. The big guy got out. He picked him up, he turned him around and thought of you and said, that's him. He said, we threw him in the air in a helicopter, and we were off in 30 seconds. We didn't have that sort of thing when we shot down over Germany. Some guys evaded, but it was, most of them killed it.
What I'd like to do now is just ask you some more specific kinds of technical questions about the way you lead missions.
Okay.
And to the extent that there's a distinction between how a B-24 crew would have handled something versus a B-17 crew, just kind of let me know. What I'd like you to do is just kind of walk me through the chronology of events on your average mission day from the time that you were woken up through the briefing, through kind of takeoff and run-up procedures. You know, in particular, in England, the weather was terrible most of the time when you guys were taking off. It was very dangerous. to have that many planes in the air with limited or no visibility. I'd like for you guys to talk about that. What was it like for you to be at 20, 25,000 feet? Planes were pressurized. The experience of flying in the cold. How you guys got used to that? What were the tricks that you guys had to deal with the cold? What would you do to try to treat a wounded crew member if that, I don't know if any of you guys had a member of your crew get wounded when you were there, or if you knew what other people, would try to do to, was there any special procedure for dealing with that? And then also getting to the initial point, as you were talking about, what exactly happened when you got to the initial point through the bombing run and then to the rally point. If you could just kind of walk us through just some of the technical details of just like one mission, so that you can kind of understand the rest of it. Yeah.
Well, normally, mission day, they had us up very early, wake us up 5 o'clock maybe in the morning, and we went to the combat mess, and they served us fresh eggs. We, right or wrong, said we're going to have a tough mission. We got the old powdered eggs. We said, well, maybe it's a milk run. That was our rationale. But we would, of course, report for the briefing. I would attend the general briefing with the 4 officers on the crew and the radio operator. The gunners would go pick up their guns, and the engineer was the same way. He was off somewhere, maybe getting instructions. But after the general briefing telling us where we were going that day and what we may encounter, then we would break up into separate groups, and I would meet with the communications officer and radio operators, and he'd give us the codes. And used to have what they called, I think it was called rice paper, and if you got in real trouble, you were supposed to eat it. So, so the Germans couldn't.
Is that how you got hepatitis?
Yeah, I think so. But then there was a lot of waiting time. Usually out at the particular ship, we hang around smoking cigarettes. The Red Cross girls would come out with coffee and cookies. One little thing I remember, some of the other guys don't remember this. They used to give us a candy bar similar to like a Milky Way. And that was a treasure. I think we got it to give us extra energy in case we got shot down. But we put it in the knee pocket of our flying coveralls. And if you thought you were in real bad trouble, certainly you didn't want to die before you ate your Milky Way. So you take your oxygen mask off and you shove the Milky Way in your mouth, and it would be as hard as this tabletop, like that. And at the same time, with the oxygen mask, your nose was running. It was always a problem, the oxygen mask. I know my nose would run all the time, but the cold was a terrible problem. 40 below zero. We had heated suits, and the one time I thought I got hit, and panicked, of course. We were getting heavy flak, and all of a sudden I got this tremendous pain in my foot. I said, I've been hit. Now we looked like blue flannel underwear. It was a heated suit, like an electric blanket. And it had little booties that attached at the heels, and also gloves. And then of course we wore the fur-lined gloves over it, and fur-lined boots over the heated booties. And I got this pain, and I said, I've been hit. Now if I had a lick of sense, I had been hit. The fur-lined boot would have had a big hole in it. But I was terrified to take the boot off. I said, it's going to be full with my life's blood. I'm dead. Well, what had happened, the little booty had short-circuited and put a big old blister on my heel, and that was the extent of my battle damage. But thinking of the procedures, we would get guess you could call it a pep talk by the pilot was the main man. In fact, we referred to the crews, it would be Hutchins' crew, so-and-so's crew. And we were sitting around a lot waiting to take off. Once you were in the air, many times I didn't even use the radio equipment. With fur boots, gloves, and trying to send code, I normally had to take the glove off. I'd send it about 5 words a minute, mainly to get through. So the inconvenience of flying, and I talk about going to the bathroom and things like that with the lady here, but that could be a problem too, We're looking at, say, maybe 6 hours on oxygen is a long, long time. A lot of guys got frostbite, where the oxygen mask fitted along their face. I'm really searching, not quite knowing what you're looking for. Maybe Hap can take over and be of more help.
Let me just ask maybe some follow-up questions with both of you guys, just chime in. Some of the books I've read, they particularly said with B-24s, when they were fully loaded, and I imagine probably true for B-17, is the takeoff itself could be a pretty scary event. If, in particular, if you had any kind of obstacle at the end of the runway. And I imagine for you guys, your life is in the hands of the pilot and co-pilot at that point in time, and the decisions that they make. And did you have any experiences like with the weather where you were taking off and couldn't see anything, and you were hitting crop wash or that type of stuff?
I went back to North Pakenham 15 odd years after the war, and I had a little Austin, and I got to the end of the runway. Nowadays they've taken all the macadam up the road. In those days it was still there. I was amazed. It went down, it went up, and it was very short, only 4,800 feet. And when I looked ahead of me, there was a tree line, and there was a gap right there, because many times the B-24 usually took off 6,000 pounds with the overload. And in order to fly that airplane, the best way to do it was, as soon as you get off the ground, literally at stalling speed, if you could get the nose down, we call it getting on the step, and it would start to fly up. Well, some of our planes didn't make it. January 5th, 1945 was a horrible day. It was snowing, there was ice on the wings, people were up on the wings with brooms and doing everything they could. It should have scrubbed the mission. The first plane off was what we call a forming ship, and it was flown by a pilot and his crew lived in my hut. And they crashed on takeoff, everybody killed. Next airplane took off. It was fully loaded with bombs. It kind of skidded around. It didn't exactly get off because of the icing. And after 3 of these incidents, they finally scrubbed the mission, but still 10 good men were killed. It was touch and go. I've often thought B-17 had a different wing. It was a low-wing airplane. And I don't know whether they had as much difficulty as the B-24, because we had a Davis wing. It was a high-tech invention in 1939. And the idea was it had a narrow chord, which meant it was a narrow wing. But the airflow was exaggerated where in the case of the B-17, they had a big full-size wing. And the result was the B-17 could go to a higher altitude than did the B-24. The B-24 flew faster. We also carried a heavier bomb load, about 2,000 pounds. My wing commander, General Leon Johnson, had always liked between the B-17 and the B-24. He didn't get 4 stars by being stupid. He was a complete diplomat. He got involved in one of these, the B-17 is the greatest airplane ever, and, and all the 24. He said, well, fellas, the way I feel about it, the best low-wing 4-engine bomber of World War II is the B-17. And all the B-17 guys is what I did. And he said, the best high-wing 4-engine bomber of World War II was the B-24. So we all go.
Well, an observation I could make, as far as taking off, I can't recall that I was particularly concerned. I guess my life was in the hands of the 2 pilots, and that was it. Moreover, was getting back and trying to land, because several times we ran into heavy fog, and then it was dog eat dog. I mean, everybody trying to get in and coming in at different directions, and that's when you really would sweat. Now, sometimes if the weather was clear, it was a particular problem, but many times coming back too, you had battle damage, which accented the problems. Yeah, but I can recall one mission where you were really almost sucked in. Should have been diverted probably to another field, but everybody was trying to get in, and there was no courtesy. Every man for himself.
Well, you can land in France when you were flying. But we flew one mission. We went to Dresden, which was a long, long way, and England was socked in, and there was some reasonable weather around the fighter strips in northern France. And man alive, here came B-24s, B-17s, and 51s, and 47s, landing in all directions. That was pretty hazardous thing. The problem with takeoffs, when I was there in the wintertime, you would take off with a 300 or 500 foot ceiling, then you'd climb, sometimes you'd climb 18, 20,000 feet still in the suit. Other times, it would be multi-layered clouds, so you'd be in and out. And unfortunately, every now and then you'd see a big flash, and you knew a couple of airplanes would run together, and probably 20 men had died.
I've always said radio operators don't know much about anything, and the thing they know least about is the engines. I would listen in on the intercom, the dialogue between the pilot, the co-pilot, and the engineer, My input would be, Lord, please let those dummies up front know what they're talking about. So I lived in my ignorance, in my little world back in the radio room.
On an average mission, once you were up in the air and formation had been brought together, you were in radio silence pretty much. Until after the bombing went and taking place. Well, or until you made fighter contact. Is that what were the rules for breaking radio silence? When could you do that?
If the pilot told me to break radio silence, that's what I'd do it. But let me talk about my 25th mission, which was the second daylight mission to Berlin. I was the lead radio operator, and what they had done by that time with the P-51 fighter, they had set up fighter control points all across Europe to Berlin. And the lead navigator, in his wisdom, would inform me we were at fighter control point A, let's say, 2 minutes early or 1 minute late of our estimated time of arrival there, and on course or off course. And I would use code and send it to bomber headquarters, I guess it was. And it was that way all the way across.
And you were the only one broadcasting as the lead radio operator. Everybody else was I understand
I
that.
assume they
Right,
were.
okay.
But then they had the P-51s that went right from England over gave area cover over Berlin, so made life a lot easier. But sometimes I was completely inactive as far as using. I never used always everything was code.
Right.
And one of my responsibilities was the IFF equipment, which at that time was supposed to be a deep, dark secret, and if we were going to go down, I was supposed to blow it up. Frankly, I didn't even know where it was located. But you know,
IFF, identification
Friend
friend
or
or
foe,
foe.
Right.
And
very knowledgeable.
Right.
I learned how to use one of those in Korea. And we had when we would fly missions in North Korea, the control point, we would identify, like Wildcat 3-4. Then he'd say Spark 1, that meant you put it in position 1. Then he'd say Spark 2. When they were flying up there and somebody's IFF went haywire, and he says, Spark 3. He says, I got 6 images on this thing. And he said, Spark 2. He said, well, at any rate, the IFF was inoperative. Finally, he said, Spark that parrot. I mean, choke that parrot. We call it a
Right,
parrot.
right.
Well, I have several write-ups that I could give you on a detail on the Black Thursday mission written by Dave Hutchins, who was our pilot. And also the great gas shortage mission in Stuttgart. And if you all are interested in seeing my photo album,
Sure.
I'd be happy to.
Yeah, I'd love to see it.
I
That'd be
don't want to
great.
be the one that's terminating this, but
No, I'd love to see your pictures. That'd be great.
all right. Like when my children were real small, we summer vacationed every year at this place in Lauderdale by the sea, prior to the time it became so
There's
built
a
up.
camera down there.
Yeah, there's a camera.
Video.
Yeah,
Mhm.
we're taking a video.
Body on candy camera.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how to do this.
Well, I think we would just look at the pictures. I don't know if we're gonna.
No,
Try and get it on video.
that's the crew, the original crew. And pick me out, you get a prize if you can pick me out.
Yeah, I don't think the guy with the headphones, he's wearing them.
Next question is, were we ever that young?
I don't feel like look at you. You said you're 5.
I was 5'7", little skinny guy.
That's not the guy with the, this guy.
That's me right there.
Ah.
No, me, I'm right in the
Up
middle.
there.
Yeah, okay.
And that's my claim to fame, I think.
This is
Hey, yeah.
And this is a B-17.
That's an F model.
model. Okay.
Okay, here we have General Aker.
Okay.
He's,
And did you take these with your own camera?
I'm very fortunate. A fellow from my little hometown on Long Island is in base photography, so he took care of me.
Oh, good.
That's our CO, Joseph Mazzaro, who later on became a 4-star. Donald Nelson visited our field. He was in charge of war production at the time, and morale was pretty low. So he came and gave us a pep talk. Things were going to get better.
Who's that, Donald Nelson?
Yeah,
Who is this again?
that's Joseph Mazzaro. He became
Yeah, he became
SAC,
man of the side.
Yeah, 4-star. That's the crew.
That's you?
No, that's our pilot,
That's your pilot.
Hutchins.
Okay, there you go. Okay, yeah, I see it, yeah.
And I actually had done care at the time. And so many years. He got killed in the Berlin area. Lester died after World War II. He died. Krugman died. Jasinski died. Braun is as healthy as a horse. He's a farmer in Indiana.
And what was his job?
He was tail gunner.
We tell them, okay.
And two guys that we never were able to track down. We checked all the jails and every place. He's the ball-tail gunner and he's a race gunner. They gave us, I have a bigger picture. They gave us a party at the Red Cross Club. And this was...
This is actually 25th mission?
No,
This
no, it
is-
was during, I can't remember, we had survived about 8 years. So this was the G model, and named Jobo. But I do have combat pictures.
Ed, was the G the one they put the chin guards on?
Yeah.
And they were-
Yep, didn't have it.
And they were still painting them green at that point. They hadn't gone to this regular.
Yeah, they were the olive gray.
Right, right.
That's of course the interior.
Now, this is the nose, looking at the nose. And,
It's the cockpit. It's the wrist.
right, now where